Hi, all. Welcome to the DSA convention panel on building DSA into the party that workers need. My name is Renee Parody, she, her, of East Bay DSA, and I'll be your moderator tonight. And our esteemed panelists. First, we have Alderman Byron Sigco Lopez, who was elected to represent Chicago's 25th ward in 2019 as part of a slate of Chicago DSA City Council candidates. He emigrated to the United States alone at the age of 17 from Ecuador. He previously worked as a researcher, teacher, and volunteer soccer coach in the Chicago public schools, and later served as executive director of the Pilsen Alliance, a social justice organization committed to developing grassroots leadership in working class immigrant neighborhoods in Chicago's Lower West Side. In his time in office, he and the other members of the Chicago Socialist slate of on the city council have fought to tax the rich, rein in the murderous Chicago police, and have generally been thorns in the side of Mayor Lori Lightfoot's neoliberal administration. And our other panelist is Margaret McLaughlin, who is a member of Metro DC DSA and an appointed member of the NEC. She endorsement questionnaires and held a series of debrief conversations with chapters after the elections in 2020 to provide guidance for how to better support chapters, candidates, and electeds. She joined DSA in 2016 and served as Metro DC's chair and as a steering committee member in the past. And for her day job, she works in labor as an organizer and strategic campaigner. So tonight we're going to hear from each of our panelists. Marge is going to talk about the party as an electoral force and what DSA being a party and an electoral force means. And then Alderman Sigco Lopez is going to discuss the party in office. What does it mean to be a party or to act as a party when we have elected officials in office? And then we'll have an intra-panel discussion for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'll hand it off to Marge.
Great, thank you, Renee. And it's great to see everybody. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about my conversations with the 2020 chapters, people who ran campaigns last year, and to talk about a little bit about how we are growing as an organization, and where we see this party formation developing. So we're at this convention right now. It's our national convention. It's our highest body. This is where everything is decided. And in the interim, when we're not in convention, it's the NPC. But and then in our day-to-day work, when we're just being members and working with our chapters, it's all very local usually. So I wanted to talk about the very exciting developments related to statewide work that we are doing electorally, because to build a party, more than anything, you need to work at the state level. And that is where we are, we're not there yet, we're getting there, and we're seeing growth patterns in that way. So I wanted to just highlight some of the really incredible things that chapters across the country have done, and ways that chapters in other states and localities could maybe get involved. So obviously, the first thing that I want to bring up is New York. New York State is really kicking butt. We know the For the Many slate. We know that we've had people in Albany and Tammany Hall for a few years now, and they're really, like Byron said, they're thorns in the side of the establishment, and it's incredible. So, as we get more people elected to the state legislature, there is a way that we can coordinate our messaging across the state, and that's what we've seen in New York, because our struggles are intertwined. Even if somebody is living in rural upstate New York, they could be struggling in the same way that somebody in the Bronx is, right? We also see that in Pennsylvania, right? So when, we elected in 2018 2 members from the Pittsburgh suburbs and a couple members from Philadelphia, when they came to Harrisburg, they had discussions, they had conversations, they talked about the things that they had in common. And it is that that middle layer, right, between the local and the national that is so important in building this party structure. And the Pennsylvania and New York is interesting because, we are endorsing these candidates and these campaigns in the very grassroots, ground up way. These are people that are coming from our movement, and we are supporting them as members of the movement. And, we have ownership over those campaigns, right? And a lot more say and pull when we're talking to them as electeds. And that's great. But it's also slow. And you kind of hit a wall once you get past, your very high DSA population districts. And, we're seeing that now. And that's a question, right? Like, what is New York and Pennsylvania going to do to build our socialist caucuses at the state level? I don't have an answer to that. A couple other ways that I've seen this statewide formation starting to take place is endorsing as a coalition partner. So, sometimes chapters don't have the power or the, volunteer base to actually run a campaign, especially a statewide campaign. But I really wanted to shout out the Tennessee chapters with Marquita Bradshaw. They pulled together and coordinated where there was no structure at all. And they managed to do statewide coordination on a US Senate race. And, with hardly any help from any of us, they really knocked it out of the park in terms of the amount of work that they did for Bradshaw. And so that is a way that you can see chapters to begin in a state, chapters to begin to have those conversations and talk to one another and coordinate statewide. And yes, we're talking about a Senate race here, right, in Tennessee, but it's also, those relationships continue on past an electoral cycle. And as you begin to have those conversations across chapters in your state, other ideas might start popping up about who might be good to run for X, Y, or Z, or what might be the best electoral route for you all as a state. And then finally, I want to talk about ballot initiatives. Obviously, they're great. Not every state has them. They're a lot more prevalent in the Western states. I just did a little looking that up. So a few of them that I want to talk about are our Florida chapters, who last year won the $15 an hour minimum wage referendum. Congratulations, you guys knocked it out of the park. SCIU actually was, the organization that was really fronting this, right? But they didn't have that volunteer base. And our DSA chapters stepped up and said, we can do this. We'll do the texts, we'll do the phone calls. And, they made it work. They made they did so much hard work and won $15 an hour. So that not only gives them a win under their belt, but they're also, again, talking and coordinating amongst all of the chapters in Florida. And that starts to build that middle layer that we desperately, desperately need, because we live in the United States and lots of things are decided on the state level, for better or for worse. Finally, I also want to call out Maine. Maine had a slate of referenda that they passed 4 out of 5 of them. And again, it was the same thing, working on that state level and figuring out ways in which that we can all get involved. And so, I wanted to just bring that up and leave you all with this idea that, working, say, you're in Pennsylvania or you're in Virginia and you're working on some local initiatives, it would behoove you, I think, to reach out to your chapters in your state to talk about the issues that they have, and if there's any way that there can be some coordination statewide. I do know that California DSA is thinking about getting an office in Sacramento. That's also not a bad idea at all, to be, where the sausage is made. it's very helpful, and it will be definitely in the future. But yeah, I love to talk about this. I think this is where we need to be, headed. And if you all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great, thank you so much. We'll now turn to the alderman for a brief presentation on DSA as a party in office. I think we're having some trouble hearing you, Alderman. I don't know if there's...
Can you hear me now? Is this better?
It's very faint. While we're waiting for the alderman to figure out the technical difficulties. Oh, great.
That sounds better.
Can you hear me now? Sorry, I'm having issues with my headphones.
We're definitely able to hear you. Go ahead. Thank you so much.
Is this better? Hello?
You cut
Sorry, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
It was better before the headphones. There was something that switched and we could hear you, and then the headphones came out and we were back to very soft. If you could just take the headphones off and just do it on speaker, I think that would work. Are you, sorry, can you hear us? Can you take the headphones off? All right, well that's, you're gonna have to unplug them, I think. Or unpair them, turn your Bluetooth off maybe. All right, Alderman, if you just want to let us know when you're able to speak, I think that would make sense. And in the meantime, I'll ask Marge a couple of questions. So I think, the idea of doing statewide work is one that we've discussed a lot on the NEC. I'm pretty involved with the effort to create an actual California DSA that has a body that can work statewide. But I wonder, right? So obviously the situation in California or New York is going to be very different in terms of whether or not we can elect people to the state legislature and what they're going to be able to do in the state legislature. Do you think that kind of statewide work matters as much in states that are deep red?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's, we saw in Tennessee, I think that you find in places that are like traditionally red that a lot of people just aren't activated. They have like thrown in the towel and they're just like, yeah, you know what, like nothing politically is for me here. I'm just going to stay doing my local work. And so just being that force that is trying to push that conversation, to a wider, a higher level, a wider audience. I think that could bring in a lot more people, we're talking about growing past 100K. And, I think that's a really good way to do that. But also, with if you talk about California versus New York, like I think that the California statewide body would be so helpful because there are so many referenda and ballot initiatives in like the California system, whereas in New York state, they only have, I know like New York City has them, but I don't think statewide they have them.
That's correct. The New York City has what are called charter referenda, where you can amend the city charter through referenda. New York State only has initiative. New York State only has referenda for constitutional amendments. And just as a little thing from being a elections nerd and a lawyer, referenda is when a legislative body refers the question to the voters, and initiative is when the voters themselves initiate the ballot measure. Right. Just as long as we're nerding out. One issue that's come up recently is how worried, and this is something that fits in with an audience question that we just got, is how worried DSA and the left more generally should be about the ownership and control of Democratic Party resources that many of our candidates depend upon, like Act Blue, which recently announced that it won't be processing donations for Andrew Cuomo, which, given that I think the official NYC DSA position is that Andrew Cuomo is the devil, we're pro for this instance, but points, it's a bad precedent to set in terms of the acceptability of a Democratic candidate. And Van, which right now the administration is controlled by the state Democratic parties, who have a varying level of friendliness to insurgent candidacies, and which was just part of a private equity consolidation move. In your view, how real a threat do you think DSA candidates getting cut off from these tools is? What would be the timescale of that concern, and what should we do in the face of this threat?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I see the alderman is back on, so I'll make this quick. The Van concerns are real and valid, but the process of building a Van equivalent would take like 2 years and $5 million. It's impossible, practically impossible, right? For us to build something, because it is a CRM that is so large. It has, there are so many data points in it, and to try to recreate that with our little organization, it just isn't possible. I don't think that the fear of donations being cut off from our candidates is a good one. But I think that our candidates are not all, they're not just DSA candidates. They appeal to a wide range of people. And, a lot of them are those left progressives, the Warrenites. Sorry, everybody. And I think that there is too much fear from that area for Van to really affect any of our candidates. In terms of the private equity consolidation, yeah, that's something that is like a new wrench that has been thrown in that just happened a few days ago, that it's very worrying. But, we just have to keep going with what we have. And, unfortunately, Van is the devil that we know. So.
Yeah, I'll just say that in New York, when I first joined the electoral committee by bothering Tasha at a bar in 2017, she was explaining that she wanted us to build an alternative to Van, because even at that point we knew it was like something that was coming. And New York DSA has put a lot of work into it and doing that, and it's stagnated. It hasn't really gone anywhere. I think the outline is there so that when we finally hit that point, which I think will be much further in the future, we'll be ready for it. But I agree with you. I think the fact that it's not just us, but other people who are willing to challenge incumbents is helpful. All right, I think we have the alderman back on with sound. So Alderman, over to you.
Can you hear me now? I hope that now it works finally.
You're good.
Thank you, and my apologies for the issues with the signal. But just in terms of the local situation right now with DSA here in Chicago, as you know, we have 5 Democratic Socialists in office. I think that is, and I think you can see the clear contrast between the platform that the Democratic Socialist, the Socialist Caucus per se has, and our counterparts from the Democratic Party. So it is. It was very clear in our election when we start our election the 2 years ago. We've been 2 years in office. We have a democratic establishment that is failing the most vulnerable, failing working people across the city and across the country. So in our efforts to revive a grassroots movement, it was very important that we honor that platform without caving in to the fear mongering of Democrats. If it was up to the Democratic Party, as you've seen, they will have lifted the moratorium on evictions. We have an environmental crisis in the city of Chicago when we have an environmental policies that are not existent, basically. Textbook environmental racism for those who have followed the cases of Hilco and implosion in the middle of a pandemic in a poor community in the southwest side of Chicago. We also have in the southeast side or south side of Chicago, General Iron, which was a metal shredder that was relocated from an affluent community where it was deemed not safe to a working class community in the south side of Chicago. Now, add insult to injury, we have a city that continues to invest in luxury housing with city funding, tax incremental financing that's supposed to be serving for infrastructure, for schools, for emergency housing, for support of small businesses, and so far that is being using to subsidize luxury housing. In the middle of a pandemic, developers took $2.5 billion. Who has been opposing these decisions? Who has been actually pushing back? The Socialist Caucus. And I think that we've seen that across the country. We see that in the city of Chicago. And that's why we got to make sure that we as democratic socialists don't give in to the fear mongering. We don't allow Democrats to provide these contradictions on international policy. More recently, what we're seeing in the Cuban issue as well, when we have a clear disconnection with history and the reality of the Cuban community, the Cuban brothers, sisters, and siblings, and so far. So it's very clear, and I mean, we can go on the immigration policies, the broken promises, the failed policies, but the biggest danger of all, and I think that's what is urgent and important that we discuss this, is that if we don't have a platform that resonates with working people, that advocates for the vast majority of people across the country, we will see the rise of fascism. We saw what happened with Nina Turner in an election in the congressional district. We see what's happening with low turnout. We see what's going on with the lack of participation of people who are starting to, and again, this is not new, they're starting to see the issues with the system. A system that doesn't work fails us all. The alternative, and I think like La Rosa Luxemburg has said, is going to be socialism or barbarism. And barbarism is fascism. Barbarism is environmental racism, is the billionaires like Bezos getting even money to go to the moon instead of investing in working people on the ground here right now. So that's what I think it was important that we organize on the ground. We won 5 seats, and our goal is to double that in the next cycle. And that's why we need to make sure that across the country we resonate and that we really put at the forefront the issues that are important to working people across the city. And I think that this is the starting the conversation so that we can connect the dots. And again, as our brother Fred Hampton said, it's about the proletarian international revolution. Let's not disconnect what happens in other countries because the Democrats or Republicans and that are funded by corporations, the same corporations that exploit people here and across the border and across the world that get their way. This is a time for revolution. This is a time to make sure that working people have a voice, and that's what we're doing in council.
It's great, great to hear. I'm a little blown away by how powerful that was. my question to the alderman, often in DSA, the question of how we relate to elected officials is phrased in terms of accountability, how to ensure that electeds listen to DSA after they get elected. I think we're seeing more and more, though, the conversation shift to how to support electeds once they get into office and face hostility from their colleagues and pressure to conform to the party line, here being the Democrats. What framework resonates for you as an elected official in DSA? And what can DSA do to make more party-like its relationship to electeds?
So for us, of course, accountability, at least in our communities, goes beyond the buzzword, the PR, right? The semantics. This is about really making decisions with and for our communities. We need to implement the participatory decision-making process that we want to see in DSA, that reflects the platform that we committed to, that we have ongoing conversations with our residents, but also that we have ongoing conversation with DSA, with leadership, with the membership, with the rank and file, to make sure that we continue advocating for working people, to continue to make sure that we represent the best interests of the public. For us, what has been critical is staying connected to the movement, is staying connected to DSA, to the organizations that have supported us, to the working people. And I think that this is a simple thing to say, but so difficult to implement on the ground. The pressures that are out there that push for us to compromise, the push for us to do it later, to do incremental changes and so forth. For us, it's important that we unequivocally talk to our residents about the priorities that are important to them. Housing as a human right, Medicare for all, that we see the Green New Deal, that those platforms are local. We cannot talk about the federal, the state, when we don't look at the very own blocks, the neighborhoods that we represent. For us, staying rooted is staying connected, and staying connected meaning having ongoing dialogue, ongoing conversations on how we are going to implement those policies on the ground, on the block. And I think that accountability has to do with what we can do for our community, what we can do for the movement, and not the other way around. Public elected officials have to reframe of what they can do for us, how they can support us to stay in office. Well, we're going to be staying in office for as long as we can honor those commitments, and to make sure that we don't cave in to the Democrats, who have no intention but to get Democratic Socialists out of office. They've shown that. We see what's going on in Seattle with Shama Kawan. That's who they are. And I think that what we're going to make sure is that we have an alternative that is strong, that is solid, and is about solidarity day to day on ongoing dialogue and horizontal decision-making process.
All right. This question is to both of you, which is, if you could choose one thing that DSA could do differently over the next 2 years to make the organization a more effective party surrogate, what would it be? And of course, why? Marge, let's go to you.
Okay. Well, I have one thing to say, and that's be nicer to one another within the organization, because you turn off a lot of people when you act like an asshole to your fellow comrades. I am so proud of the work that we've done over the past couple of years, and we can grow, and it's important to be combative, but we need to be combative to the right people. And I think that there's a lot. I know that we're in convention and we're arguing about resolutions that are going to take over, the trajectory of our organization. But goddamn, don't call people like COINTELPRO like fascists because they disagree with you on one resolution, because it turns off a lot of people. And if we're going to win, we need to get more members. And if you're not an asshole, and if we're just like shitting all over social media about how, somebody is a narc, somebody is a cop, when they're actually not, it just turns off a lot of people. And that goes to, and like I will pull it back to the electoralism thing. It's important to have conversations with people outside of your little group, right? I know that like I have friends in DSA who I like text all the time, but it's also important to be very assertive and reach out to somebody maybe on another working group or another committee and ask them how they're doing. Ask them for a one-on-one. Talk to them about what their plans are, what the projects that they're doing, that they're excited about are, and to try to build those connections across committees, working groups, caucuses, and chapters, because we are not going to grow if we continue in our little siloed little, groups. So be nice. My shirt says be kind or go away. So.
All right. Again, maybe not quite on point for electoralism, but a welcome message nonetheless. Alderman, what would you say?
Well, I think it's very important that we gravitate to those who want to build socialism, that want to build a different society. I think there's no doubt that we live in a time where we certainly have co-optation of movements. That has happened time after time. I think that we have to make sure that we, and I think I'm gonna be very sincere. Democrats are masters of co-optation. They co-opt the spaces. They pitch people against each other. They're chaos creators. They're very good at that. And I think it's very important that we, as a socialist, as a socialist movement, that we connect with our brothers, sisters, and siblings on the ground. That we gravitate to those who want to build a socialist movement, that want to build socialist organizations. We want to make sure that we gravitate and we build with those who want to do the work, the platform. So I think that we should focus on a platform. We got to focus on those who want to build socialism, that we want to build an alternative to what we see. I do think that we have to be careful with the people who come in to for the picture, for the appearances, but they don't want to do the work. Again, I don't think that we should focus on what we see, and unfortunately sometimes is the pitching against each other, the rumors, the multiple issues that we see sometimes, the interpersonal issues. This is about a platform. This is about issues and building and focusing on issues that are going to build and inspire others to join us, because our policies work. Because we have seen, when we talk about why we're talking about defunding the police, is because defunding the police means that we can fund mental health, we can fund public housing, that we can fund alternatives that will keep our community safe. And we have provided clarity to our community. So the clarity cannot be lost. And I tell you that confusion, that the fear mongering, the pitching against each other, those who come to spaces to dominate the spaces, those who come to spaces just for the talk, but not for the action. Actions speak louder than words. Actions speak to our communities that we mean what we said, that we show by example how far we're willing to go for justice and freedom for all. That's what is important, that we focus on those efforts. Let's not get into the distractions. Let's not focus on the cause creators that want to disconnect us from the reality and the urgency of the times. Let's gravitate for those who want to build with us, those comrades, those brothers, sisters, and siblings, to work with us for a more just and incredible world.
Well said. So I'm going to ask the last question that we had pre-written, but I want to encourage anyone in the audience to go ahead and submit questions. I don't know exactly how it happens. I assume you do, but they do pop up for us. So we'll be taking them after this next moderator question. So both of your answers sort of get into this question of how we treat one another and what we do inside movement spaces. And we touched a little bit on accountability for electeds earlier, and how the focus seems to be shifting a little bit for support rather than accountability as a framework. What do individual DSA members owe their electeds or DSA? In a word, is it a problem when individual DSA members do mean tweets about AOC? How should we think about party discipline as members of this proto-party? And if either of you want to take it first, go ahead, but otherwise I'll default to Marge, since the Alderman spoke last.
Sure. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll take that. So I mean, I think that it's okay to yell at electeds, no matter if they are, one of us or not. I think that that is part of the job. And, if people are mad, people are mad. They have the power to, at least in part, change that. And I don't think that we should shy away from that, because, again, like, an elected is only as good as they are, as their closeness to the movement and to bettering the lives of working people. And any day an elected could have a conversation with a lobbyist, I don't know, hypothetically, and start to shy away from that. And so, yeah, like, I'm totally fine with us holding electeds' feet to the fire. But it is, there is a line, there is a way to be pissed off and to be, principled in what you want, but also, people can and do take it a little bit too far. I think that discipline in terms of treatment means more about, like, more to your members, right? Your comrades. But if you're in elected office, that is just a part of the job, getting yelled at and being told that what you're doing is wrong, because, to a lot of people, sometimes you are, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I am absolutely in favor of yelling at elected officials. I just think sometimes we might want to yell at them in a concert, in a chorus, rather than it's cool. Anyway, Alderman, go ahead.
So I think it's important to yell at elected officials. I think it's healthy, and I think that we should welcome it, because we are nothing but the representatives of the people. We are representatives, and if we are not representing those voices adequately, if we're not capturing the voices of the majority of the people who need to be represented, the voices of the people have not been heard for a long time. We have an obligation to hear him, and if we're not, of course, we have to make sure that we challenge each other. I think we got to welcome the challenge and welcome that conversation. I think through those challenges, we see better policies. We see better coordination, with better communication. So we should not be shy away from the accountability. Actually, I think it's very healthy that we challenge each other, because we can provide a better understanding. I think that, just to give you an example of why is that important, as a Democratic Socialist, I represent the Chinatown community here in Chicago, and it was a time where the conversations about public safety, the conversations about socialism, I can take you in different routes. It's through these challenges that we can truly dive in, and we can talk about what really keeps us safe, to make sure that we talk about with our communities what works and what doesn't. And we should not shy away, because shying away creates distrust, and shying away creates misconceptions. And I think that if we're operating with the best interest of the public at heart, and we're being honest about our policies, we should not shy away. We should welcome it. And I do think through that conversation, and if we're truly good to our socialist core values, we should be able to provide solutions and answers to our community, the community who are in dire need to be heard, but more than anything else, to make sure that we're honest with them about where we're going.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn to some of the audience questions now. I want to apologize if we don't make it to your question, because we have received quite a bit. But with regard to the Democratic Party, what has been the most successful messaging strategy about running with them? Should we be more combative or more conciliatory? Does it matter, race by race? Marge, do you want to?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've talked about this a lot in terms of, how we endorse candidates on the NEC, like at the national level, but it really is, it's a case by case basis. Every election is a calculus question. It's not arithmetic. You have to factor in so many things, like the incumbent, where the money is coming from. are unions supporting, what are unions supporting in terms of, the candidates? And depending on all of those answers, that level of antagonism can change. So like, for example, when AOC was running for the first time, like, what's his name? I don't care. Forget his name. Like that was a perfect example of somebody who was like so deep in dark money and was so embedded in the Democratic, was so embedded in the Democratic Party that it's like, yeah, we got to hit him hard. But like, there are other examples of people who are, it's not as clear. And, the work might be more of like, actually just like, instead of this antagonistic campaign, door knocking and talking about, the very specific, platform planks that our candidate supports that the incumbent does not, or the other person running does not support. Yeah, and I mean, I think it also is a lot about personality. Like, I think that some people can get away with a lot more, and some people, invite a lot more heat than other people. And if you are at all like wanting to talk about that kind of, how do we approach this race? Like, the NEC is here and we would love to talk to you about it. We are, a bunch of weird election nerds, and we're always here to talk to you.
I second that as one of those other weird election nerds. Alderman?
And can you repeat the question again to make sure that?
Yeah, so basically the question is with regards to the Democratic Party, what the most successful messaging strategy is about running with them, whether we should be more combative or more conciliatory, and does it matter race by race?
So I think that it again, every locality looks different, right? I think it goes to the local conditions on the ground, but I think that we should not have alliances that start or continue to compromise our core values. I think that if we, at least in the political arena, we certainly want to make sure that we build coalitions to build legislation that helps our community. But when that is being compromised, I do think also, of course, we have to reassess our alliances and reassess our ability to work with a party or with a group that is not in line with our values and our principles. There was a question again about consequences. As you know, there were 6 Democratic Socialists in Chicago that were elected. Now we're 5. So yes, there are consequences. I want to make sure that I don't leave that question out. But I do think that in terms of building alliances to make sure that we work for as long as that takes us to a socialist reality, I do think that we continue working with that. But I do think in the long run, and I think it's very clear that we're working towards socialism and those who are working for capitalism. So there's a big difference there. And I think that for us to make sure that we honor that, and I think you can see, and I want to bring back this issue with Cuba, when we have the Democratic Party that continues to suffocate our Cuban brothers, sisters, and siblings, is inhumane. Is completely unacceptable what's happening in that, and it's clearly and it's very clear that the conditions have been created to sabotage the Cuban government. And I think that that's something that we can see very clearly on the state of propaganda that we live. So I think that it's very important that us as socialists have that understanding that we can make alliances and we can make coalitions for as long as that serves the greater good, the public, internationally and locally. But we should not shy away when those alliances are harmful to break them and make sure, and again, in the long run, we build towards socialism. And I think that's our ultimate goal and mission.
Yeah, I'll just, those are both great answers. I would just follow up to say that I think that there's the messaging that you give on the doors where people are asking you, is your candidate a Democrat? And you say, yes, absolutely. And you don't say, well, yeah, but actually we believe in this, party surrogate model and we're anti-corporate, right? You say, yeah, he's a Democrat and this is why his opponent is terrible, right? But what the message you want, I think, when you're talking to like people on Twitter about, getting donations, you say you're, fighting the corrupt Democratic establishment, right? Like, I think there are different ways that those messages work, but just on a sheer messaging level, I think most of the working class in America that is politically engaged, Democrat is their number one political identity, and it's worth reckoning with that when you're running races. All right, the next question is, how do we overcome the socialist identification shock? Is political education or rhetorical focusing on issues generally a better approach? So counterposing those two approaches of political education or focusing more on issues. And this time, just to switch it up, I'll go to the alderman first.
Thank you. I think it's very clear that despite the fear-mongering of the Democratic Party, we as Democratic Socialists have done well when we stick to our values and principles and policies. In Chicago, we won 6 elections with a Democratic Socialist platform and being socialism front. Bernie Sanders have done well as a openly socialist candidate. And I think that we have done well when we are clear, consistent with the policies. And ultimately, when we govern, we have to deliver. I think that the issue comes when we go back in our promises, when we go back in our commitments, and we betray the trust that was given to us as Democratic Socialists and as Socialists. I think that I tell you, and I will bring back the case of Chinatown. In Chinatown, the first questions that came when we were running in office is that we don't want socialism in our community. That was one of the questions that came out. We see what communism does. We see why this is not a model that we want to follow. But then when we start talking about, well, what about Social Security? What about Medicare for all? What about the Green New Deal? What about housing as a human right? It seems like the conversation shifted. And that conversation was essential for us to provide the clarity that people need, that these socialist policies work and the socialism work. I think that we have been able to show that in other countries, socialism has done extremely well. And that in our community, and this is in the Latin American community, it is very important because, as you're seeing, and we cannot be ahistoric. What happened in Chile, for instance, the destruction of a democratically elected socialist government and the imposition of a bloody dictator. What has happened in Cuba when a revolutionary regime rises against a bloody dictator and a bloody dictator. And we have seen about the destabilization of governments down south the border. So it is very important that we articulate with arguments, and we have to be readers of history. We have to know our history. We have to know who we are so that we know where we're going. Then Fred Hampton is extremely popular because he knows what everybody knows in Chicago about the Black Panthers and what the Black Panthers stand for. And it's very important that we, as a movement, not only inform the public, not only have these political education, these popular education conversations, but we in government deliver and don't shy away, and then all of a sudden start playing as a Democrat and building towards capitalism. It is essential, and I think in this time that we maintain that consistency and that commitment that has to be guided by historical analysis, but the reality on our conditions in our communities, but ultimately to a commitment for freedom and justice.
Yeah, absolutely. That was incredible. Thank you, Alderman. And I just want to build off of that. I think it's important to know who your constituents are, right? If you're canvassing or building up a campaign for somebody that we're endorsing. For example, in DC, there are a lot of people from El Salvador. So I tell people all the time, it's really important that you understand the history of the United States and El Salvador, because that comes up, not at the door, maybe occasionally at the door, but like the history is there. And what the alderman was saying about our struggles being intertwined, especially in the Americas, is 100% true. And I don't think that we actually do that enough. So I just wanted to underline that point.
All right, great. So we're going to do one last question so that we can end on the hour and turn over this room to the debate block. But someone asks, how do we avoid becoming the Green Party? Marge, do you want to take first crack at this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, I don't want to wade into the political, what we're going to be voting on today, right? But there are just structural barriers to getting on the ballot line across the country. I think that what we've been doing in terms of antagonizing the Democratic Party and then running independent when we can has been pretty successful. I mean, especially considering where we were 5 years ago. Most of you probably weren't even in DSA this time 5 years ago. So, except for Renee. And so, yeah, I think that we are all on the same page in terms of not wanting to be a part of the Democratic Party, like that, the corporate Democratic Party, because it's frustrating. We've seen our families suffer for 20, 30 years under their leadership. And, it's hard to have to share a ballot line with them. But unfortunately, we have elections laws that force us into this conundrum. And I know that in some municipalities, you can run nonpartisan, you can run third party, and that's awesome. And we should use it when we can, but it is more important to be strategic and to continue to grow than to try to create that party structure like the Green Party. And that's why I started this whole hour talking about that state level coordination between chapters, because if we are going to have a party, that's where it needs to happen anyway, and we're not there yet.
Thank you. All right, Alderman, you have just 4 minutes before we gotta leave the room.
Yes, and I'll try to be brief. But I think that the key is in what we've done in the work is building our base, building a solid foundation, and building locally. We cannot build the party and then the base. We have to build the base and then the party. And I think that's what we're doing. We're building solid ground. We're building on the ground on each block in our local school councils. We're building in our blocks. We're living in city councils. And we will build a stronger party. We'll build a stronger movement. But it has to be built in solid foundations. So for us, I think it's essential to know that we built on issues, that resonate with the working people, that we built on a foundation that we're all proud of. And we should all be proud of being socialist in a time like this. If 4 years ago, people saw the value in us, and I think that from across the world, we see the need for a different and more just world, I do think that this is the time to feel proud. And I think door to door, I think in those conversations, school by school, block by block, we can make a difference. And make no mistake about it. We will be in the long run in a position where we can run a party that is a party of socialists of America, that will be the example that we want to see in each community and across the world. We all benefit, people here in our communities and across the world. I want to end because this is a very, very important part from a good friend, Carlos Lasso from Cuba, who made this very good connection about the blockade that we see, the unjust blockade on anybody who does not want to be subjected to a cruel and inhumane system, and the blockade that is inhumane but hasn't really caved in on the resiliency of the Cuban people who understand the price of freedom. They understand the importance of justice because they've lived it, and they are standing courageously against oppression. Now, they connected that struggle to the blockade of our working class communities across the country, to the poor people on the south side, on the rural areas, to the people in the black communities and the brown communities in Chicago and across the country. We make the connection, and make no mistakes. We not only win locally, but we will make sure that we win across the country, and all the blockades will be ended.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, on that inspiring note, I want to thank both of our panelists, Marge and Byron, and thank all of our attendees for your great questions. I apologize for those that we didn't get to. And as Marge alluded to, the National Electoral Committee has put forward a resolution on basically building DSA into a mass party body. So look forward to that debate later.